G Block's Go Deeper podcast series. My name is Sheila Krishna. I am the G Block Community and Program Director, and it is my pleasure to introduce another G Block member to you today. His name is Kevin J Brazant. He is a divergent thinker and talented learning designer, storyteller, and content creator and producer with values of social justice in society and education. Lounge Academics is his personal storytelling brand, and as a freelance content creator, he produces co-creative projects to increase representation and visibility of marginalized voices, making him a sought-after public speaker, facilitator, and co-conspirator. Kevin has gained numerous awards and fellowships in recognition of his work in and around creative education. He has been featured in media such as the BBC One Extra, Look Magazine, the Evening Standard, and Radio 4's Woman Hour, to name a few. Welcome, Kevin. It's a pleasure to have you here.
Thank you, Sheila. Thank you for the warm welcome. Thank you.
So let's dive in. We'll start with the first question that we ask all our guests is to tell us your why. What do you consider to be your purpose or your mission in the world?
Thanks, Sheila. Yeah, so my why really has been developed from my own personal experiences of education. So for me, I didn't have the greatest experience of statutory school education here in the UK. For me, and I think my experience and my story will really resonate with a number of people as well. I think a lot of people will be able to connect with the experiences of the educational system. I found my journey to be one that was quite dry. I engaged in learning in a way that I felt didn't really suit my own interests and needs, and didn't really appeal or speak to me in a way that made learning fun or engaging. And as a result of that, that's gone on to kind of influence the work that I do in education and the creative projects that I develop. So my big why is transforming education. So I see myself as somewhat of a disruptor of disrupting traditional education with a view to kind of, transform learning for people. And in particular, people who have often seen themselves as being quite marginalized or not having a voice in education. So I'm about creativity and making learning more accessible and more fun.
Awesome. So can you tell us what is the one big idea you wish to bring to the world and why?
Okay,
What do you
thank
hope
you.
happens as a result?
Definitely. One of my big ideas, which is a project I'm currently developing at the moment, is called Disrupting the Discourse. So that's my kind of brand, and this is linked to my work in Lounge Academics. I'm really passionate around the use of co-creation, particularly of digital content, and how we could use that as part of the learning experience. I think where we look at various platforms like TikTok, Instagram, and various other social media outputs, and in technology in general, we are finding increasingly creative ways in which we can create educational projects. And I think this is a great use of technology as a resource in terms of helping students in particular to learn, and people in general. Although my immediate context is in higher education, I think it's an accessible tool for all people, for all adults and children. So for me, disrupting the discourse is how we disrupt the way that we see learning and teaching, particularly within educational institutions and spaces that are very traditional. I like to see us incorporate some creativity, maybe some spoken words, poetry, photography, photographic essays and video essays. I think these are great tools that we can use to really enable the community and create collaborative, creative connections as well.
Oh, that sounds wonderful. That's the kind of learning experience that I would have loved to had more of when I was in school. So that sounds amazing. So we're going to dive into some questions about connection. At GBlog, connection is something we talk about a lot. So how do you choose who you actively build a professional or a personal relationship with? What's important to you? What do you really look for when you really look to deepen a connection with someone you've met?
Yeah, definitely. I think for me, the way I go about, I guess, fostering and developing those personal connections and professional connections are kind of linked. They're very similar in the way that I go about doing that. I think something that's very important to me are having aligned values. That's really important. So where there are particular values around compassion, equity, empowering people, that's really important to me. And people who share those values, I tend to get on very well with. So that's within a professional and personal context. I like to also identify people who I would say are smarter than me. And what I mean by that is people who I can learn from, people who can really help to make me stronger, particularly in areas where I may be weak. So I
Mhm.
don't necessarily want to look for echo chambers. I want to look for people who, I may not have a particular strength in a particular area, but they may be stronger in that area. So I think definitely from a professional point of view, there's someone who can really develop me, help and mentor, support me as well. And I look for that also in personal relationships. I'm particularly interested in people who are quirky, creative, unconventional, people who are willing to kind of disrupt things. I
Mm,
really like people, and I'm not talking about people with just, and when I say disruption, I'm talking about good disruption, things that change for the better of people and
mm.
to advance certain conversations. But most definitely, I like to connect with people and commune with people who think outside of the box, have different ways of looking at things, very much are very unconventional, and can really contribute to my ways of seeing, doing, and creating. And that's really important to me.
Awesome. Yeah, I think that's something I definitely share with you is I love people who get me out of my own comfort zone and can
Mm.
help me grow and learn. So because I love to learn. So I really appreciate that. Um, so what are some of your favorite questions to ask when getting to know someone and why?
Yeah, no, that's brilliant. Yeah, that's a cool question actually. So for me, I'm really interested in finding out from people their why. I often will start by asking why do you do what you do? So I'm very interested in seeing what people's kind of intrinsic motivators are for doing what they
Mhm.
do. So Simon Sinek's, the why in what you do, finding the why, I think is very important. So that's something that's really resonates for me when asking people or getting to know people. Equally, as well, I'm quite interested to find out from people if they were deserted on an island, what would be the three things that they would need to bring comfort to them? So I'm really interested yet again to kind of find out what people prioritize, what's important to them in terms of their values. So that's something that's
Yeah.
very key to me as well. Oh, I think we've frozen a bit.
For, but I've never used it. Oh, I've never really used it in a context of getting to know someone, but that's brilliant because I can see how much ask that question would enable me to learn about a person. So I like that question. So we're going to talk about community since D Block is all about community, and I think you've shared a little bit about this. But what are the communities you actively engage in and why?
Yeah, definitely. So I'm obviously, because of my context in higher education, I work and are very active in academic learning communities. So, communities of practice where we may be joined together by a shared interest or a common theme in terms of our work. So I'm very active in communities that particularly are passionate around social justice
Mm-hmm.
themes, particularly themes around anti-racism, looking at intersectionality, as well as looking at other themes of kind of improving outcomes for students as part of learning. So that's the one set of communities that I would say that I'm very active in as well. Also very active in gym and fitness. I really like resistance training and bodybuilding and strength conditioning. So I'm very active in those communities as well, outside of work. And I'm also very much active as part of a fathers community where we get together to do all things related to fatherhood, and that's through debate, discussion, as well as doing events and getaway days with the children, with family. That's something that's very important to me as well, especially when we explore themes of fatherhood and masculinity as well, which I think is very important today as the world is changing and turning. So these are themes that are very passionate to me, and I tend to have a community interest group or some form of community that I'm connected to explore those interests.
That's great. And I agree, I personally do a lot of work with women and starting to host a lot of like women's circles. But I do feel like there's at least where I'm in Toronto, I feel like there's still a lack of like where I see gathering spaces for men. So, and I think that is really, really important. So that's really wonderful to hear that you're engaged in that. Um, so in terms of so we're going to talk about contribution. So can you tell us a favorite story you have about where you've created impact for someone in your life? And it could be personally or through work. What's something that's a really memorable story of creating impact?
Yeah, sure. I think for me, one story is related to work, and my background, as you can tell, is in education, and I've worked with students in various different contexts. So from school, which here in the UK, statutory school age from ages of kind of 11 or 12 up until 16, as well as in further education, which is college, and then university for us, which is from 18 upwards. Um, my experience has been working with young people and people in different contexts who have really re-established a love for learning, and particularly when they've had a bad experience in the past. So often, by the time I'm worked with students, they tend to have often had quite a negative experience previously within the educational system, whether that's because of things like school exclusion, or maybe because they didn't get a particular idea and they were made to feel like they were less than or less smarter than their peers. Um, and for me, what I've done is to be able to introduce techniques on a one-to-one coaching level, as well as part of community peer learning as well, and to, flip the script in the way that we may learn and encourage students to have agency. And one particular example that comes to mind was a student who she wasn't doing particularly great in some of her modules, and there was, her writing wasn't particularly at the level that was required. And she definitely wasn't happy with the grades that she was in. But when I introduced this kind of peer learning community, as well as introducing new ways of looking at her learning, particularly looking at her intrinsic motivators, and kind of preparing her to think about how her learning could impact the world in terms of her practice. So this particular student was studying social work. So she was very passionate around ideas of social justice and equity, but was unable to really make that work as part of her writing. She couldn't really articulate that in her writing. But once we looked at ways that we could explore doing that and really reigniting her passion for why she was passionate about her practice and work, we found that that affected her ability to write about how she was describing the changes that she wants to see in the world. And she went on to do very well, actually, as a result of that. And that translated into a first-class dissertation project. So I was quite
Wow.
proud of that, considering that a lot of people had written her off to begin with. So that
Mm.
was a great result.
Oh, that's wonderful. I'm really glad to hear that. And I can imagine that would be very powerful to witness as well.
Mm.
Um, so, what does a better world to you look like? And how do you see yourself taking part in creating that?
Yeah, I think for me, I'm really interested in this. I don't know if you've heard of Howard Gardner's work around multiple intelligences.
Mhm.
I'm really I think we need to really move away from this cognitive load of how we see learning in terms of, writing essays. We really need to rethink the learning and educational process. I'd like to see the better integration of live briefs. And what I mean by that is, particularly for colleagues that are, or students who are studying around going into professional roles or services or building community, I would like them to really be able to impact or be a part of real life initiatives and projects. We're at a time now where in higher education, students are being able to forge partnerships with the universities or institutions that they're studying at. And for me, I'm really keen to see how we can integrate that
Oh,
as part of help.
wait,
Oh, hello. Hi. You
I think
frozen?
for, for a little.
Hi, Sheila. I think it's frozen on my side. Can you hear me? Can you see me? Sheila, you there? Oh,
Hey, so you so it just started freezing when that
yeah,
last
yeah.
question.
That's what.
That's
Yeah.
okay. We can
Do you want to
let's
do that again?
yeah, let's do that again. It's already recording and
Okay.
I'll just we'll just like edit it. So,
Okay.
okay, so the next question I have is what does a better world to you look like and how are you taking part in creating that?
Yeah. Thanks, Sheila. I think for me, in terms of creating a better world, I really want to kind of look at how we view intelligence in particular. I think we need to look at that in its broadest sense. At the moment, we use a lot of cognitive assessments and assignments, particularly around written work, particularly around our ability to integrate kind of academic language and writing. I think we need to go beyond this. I think we need to look at other forms of intelligence. Sometimes, there are people that are more naturally gifted in terms of movement and body and more kinesthetic in their way of learning and expressing what they learn as well. And I think we need to bring in more evidence of that. I think we need to bring in more opportunities for people to learn in creative ways. So for me, something I'm very passionate about is disrupting how we see intelligence and learning and education more generally. I'd like to think I'm already contributing to that already in terms of making a better world. And I think through that, you're more likely to enable people to be more authentic and authentically be themselves so they don't feel that they have to enter spaces or places that tick a certain box or have to think about how they adapt to fit into an environment. I think actually we should be creating environments that enable people to be themselves and to just be. So for me, I think we start with that with the institutions and the learning that we create as well. And I think from that, where people are allowed to be authentic, I think you get the best out of those people. And therefore, they enable you to get the best out of yourself as well, because then
Uh,
everyone's being authentic. So, yeah.
yeah, absolutely. So we're gonna just dive into our last question. So if you could run G Block for a day, what would you do with the community?
Okay. So for me, it would definitely be looking at some ways that we could explore learning through co-creation. I'd have some really excited ideas of how we can, co-create stuff. So I'm quite interested in concepts of kind of hackathons. Normally when we think about hackathons, we usually think about that within, technological kind of industries, looking at software development. But why couldn't we look at a hackathon for creating world peace? Why couldn't we
Mhm.
look at that addressing issues around gender-based violence or other issues that we have in the world and really getting some of our most creative and talented minds around the table? So I'd
Yeah,
be really interested in looking at the shared interests of communities, of the community within G Block, linking those interests and finding really creative ways in which we can see the world and do cross interdisciplinary approaches to the way that we do that. And I have some exciting ideas of how we could do that already, to mix it up and keep it fun. So that would
that,
be me.
that sounds great. Well, thank you so much. It was such a pleasure to have you on our podcast, and thank you for your insights. We're so grateful to have you as a part of the community.